we're so obsessed with safety that we're removing courage. When you really choose to live and be alive in your living, you are inherently going to experience so many expressions of unsafety and insecurity. And I can't guarantee you that you're going to feel safe, because this is such a personal experience as well, because what might feel really safe for me doesn't feel safe for you. And so we have to renegotiate our relationship with safety. And so instead of calling it safe relating or nonviolent communication or nonviolent relating or whatever, which is beautiful, this part of my work is really about how can we cultivate the courage that we need so that no matter where we are, we're able to regulate or mobilize.
Before we get started, I wanted to share with you a new opportunity we have here specifically for plant medicine practitioners. So if you're a plant medicine practitioner and you're looking to really hone in on your unique medicine, you're going to want to learn more about our newest program and offering called SpiritLed. This is for you if you are ready to reinvent yourself as a ceremonialist, really using your unique gifts and your unique medicine to create specialized experiences that are unlike any other practitioner. Or if you have some training, but you're still experiencing a little bit of doubt or lack of confidence on bringing yours forward, whether you really meant to do this work or how to do it in a way that's authentic and in integrity. We're helping you, again, tune into your unique gifts so you're not mimicking the shaman that you learned from another lineage, and you don't have to act clinical to feel like you can be received or respected, and help you land in yourself the magic that you carry and walk you through this entirely immersive experience that not only is going to change your life, but is going to help you put together a ceremony that is exactly in alignment with this higher vision that you have for yourself and also for your clients. So be sure to follow the links for SpiritLed or reach out to me at grow@holdenhealingarts.com if you want to get more information. This is a really small specialized program, so we won't be advertising it everywhere. You'll probably need to reach out directly to me to learn more. Now, on with the show. Welcome. This is Leading with Spirit, the show that gives you an in-depth look at topics like what it takes to navigate your spiritual journey, how to heal yourself and grow your spiritual gifts, and balanced practices to expand your business and your spiritual leadership. I'm your host, SpiritBird, shamanic teacher, healer, and author, here to guide you on your journey to becoming your most potent spiritual leader. Hello and welcome back. I have with me Alexis Sabatino today. She's the founder of the global women's movement, She Heals Collective. She initiates and guides women through rites of passage and soul embodiment. And in particular, she has this gorgeous large body of work on the sister shadow. She's here today to talk to us about brave relating. Alexis, welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation, SpiritBird. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'd love to just dive right in, especially on this sister shadow. Tell me a little bit about how that body of work came forward for you.
I've been working with women and girls for a long time. And it's funny when you look back retrospectively on your life, you can see the way the foundations are being laid, and you're being guided and you're being called and you're being shown things that are relative to whatever it is that you're here to do in this life. And so I've had a really interesting viewpoint for the last 17 years because I've been in leadership spaces and women's spaces for that long. I started when I was 18, and growing up with an older sister, growing up with a lot of women and my mom, and seeing the patterns that played out, has been one of my biggest wounds. And so therefore, there's an opportunity for so much wisdom to be cultivated when we really lean in. And even though it's been one of my biggest wounds and one of my biggest pains, I've just always loved women. I've just always had this sensation of, I want to be with the women. I want to be with the girls. I want to be in the circle, even when it hurt, even when there was distortion, even there was just this sensation of not wanting to push it out, and always finding myself with like female bosses and in spaces that were and little by little, step by step, I started doing a lot of healing work and coaching work. I started creating women's circles. Prior to that, I was years before that, going to other people's circles and been in that space. And I just kept seeing So many things play out in the invisible field that weren't being named. Going to women's circles and being so attuned and so sensitive and so aware and feeling all the distortion that wasn't being spoken to and all the ways it moves through the circle, but we all just go, let's just sing Kumbaya and throw rose petals and set our intentions and pretend like we're doing the work. And I don't say that to be judgmental, but there is this kind of superficial layer that I was noticing in the women's spaces. And we can speak to this as the foundation of, or the fundamentally rooted in the artificial self, or the good girl, which is such a culturally conditioned psychic entity that implants itself in us from the time that we're little girls. So it's not a judgment, more just this understanding of, whoa, like where are the real, authentic, deep, messy, raw spaces that we can speak to this stuff. And as well in my own women's spaces, in my own schools, in my own circles, in my own groups, I was watching and thinking, things are playing out here between the women in my groups. And they're coming to me to express this or express that, or they're not, and I'm just witnessing it. And what do I want to do with this? Rather than speaking to each woman outside of the circle when they come to me in private, how can I actually make this a group exercise? How can I actually make this a communal exercise where we're learning to flex a muscle that we've forgotten, that's weakened over time, instead of leaning away from the discomfort, instead of leaning away from the wound, the trigger, instead of leaning away from the fear of rejection, whatever it is, what if we leaned in? Like, what would happen? And so I started to get really curious and I started to do my own research and just data collect. So I started asking friends, neighbors, colleagues, clients, women that I admired. I looked inward and I started to map what is the expression of the sister wound. If we go beyond this kind of generic conversation of sister wound, like what's actually happening and how do we map it? How do we track it? How do we label it? How do we, I don't want to use the word pathologize, but to some degree, what's the symptomology of this? How do we, so we know how to work with it? And I started to see these patterns come up. And in the stories that women were sharing with me in my data collection, I started to see these very clear patterns come up and the unique, nuanced way that the sister wound would express itself in each woman's life based on her unique experiences, her unique traumas, her unique culture, her family. All of these things played a role in the way that her, what I now call her constitution of wounds, her unique woundology expresses itself. And I also started to see a relationship between if you have this expression of the wound and I have this expression of the wound, how are they engaging with one another? How are they triggering one another? How are they repelling each other or magnetizing each other? What's playing out within your woundology and my woundology? Because I've gotten to a place, I had gotten to a place before where I was just so tired of these artificial, superficial, like um, spiritual bypassing exercise. And it was boring and it was uninspiring. And I just thought somebody needs to do this. Somebody needs to start mapping this. So I started mapping it and I started to see that not only was there a sister wound, there's a sister shadow, which is the body of work. And that really the wound is the place, right? The imprint of the experience that impacts our nervous system, that impacts our DNA, it impacts our overall vitality, it impacts our creativity, it impacts our psyche, it impacts everything. And then you have what develops on top of that or over that is a shadow that wants to do everything it can to keep anyone away from touching that wound. And so we have these expressions of what actually is our genius, because that's what shadow is once it's been transmuted, once it's been illuminated, once it's been held and loved, it becomes our genius. But in the shadow realm, it expresses itself in order to protect the wound. I don't want you to see this. I don't want you to touch this. So I'm going to project something that I unconsciously feel is going to keep you away from this so I can stay safe. So I can stay hidden, so I can stay agitated, that it's not inflaming my life. And then I started to track on top of the wound map, I started to track this kind of shadow archetypal architecture of who are these shadow characters that play out in women's psyches and how are they moving through the world and how are they relating to one another? How are they speaking to one another? How are they engaging? What's the patterns in the engagement and the communication? And I just went nuts with mapping everything and tracking everything. And then in 2021, this is actually our 3-year anniversary. I was working on this longer than the first cohort prior to that date. But it's the 3-year anniversary of our first cohort of this immersion. And it's interesting because I knew it was going to be impactful. I knew it was going to be, I knew there were women who wanted this, but there was also a part of me that thought, who is going to want to go to these places? Because it's not pretty. And wouldn't you know, the first cohort, within minutes of me dropping the registration, there were women inside of it.
Mhm.
Because, and that for me was this realization of how badly, how big the desire was in the transpersonal field for spaces to exist where we could finally free ourselves of the masks, of the stories, of the fakeness, of the superficial spiritualism, all these things. We were ready to let go of it because women were coming. They were coming, and it just started to explode. And it's what continues to propel me is knowing that this is a space that's very unique. And in my experience in my travels, I have yet to see a space that exists like this in terms of the way that women's work is and has been placed within the context of healing. This is a very unique space. So I hope that answers your question around the sister shadow, sister wound difference and also where it came from.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm just tracking experiences and memories that I've had around this, and I've seen that and experienced it myself, that like what you spoke to with that longing to really be really deeply
Mm,
with other women, and also that level of fear that's there too.
mm,
And I see in a lot of spiritual communities, one of the byproducts I see of the level of artificialness is people think there's a connection when they're in group, and then when they're not in group, they're right
yes.
back into this drama or this gossip or distrust.
Yes.
And so then when they go back into the group, it like magnifies the level of artificialness again, because
100%.
they've had this experience of, you're telling me this, but I'm actually feeling this from you. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're basically lying directly to each
Mm-hmm.
other, which hurts our hearts too.
Mm,
And yeah, and the cycle continues.
yeah.
And I think creating spaces where not just women, but all of us can navigate or understand the difference between being uncomfortable or agitated and like actually unsafe is
Mm.
really important too.
I love that. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. There is this coming into circle with this, oh, there's connection and oh, there's intimacy, but the distortions are playing out and the shadow patterns are playing out outside of circle, and then we come back in and it's like layer upon layer of mask then because you just have to keep lying. You have to keep covering up. And then it literally becomes this entity that sits inside of groups, inside of families, inside of communities, and then what we're seeing on the macrocosmic level, it's sitting in culture, it's sitting in politics, it's affecting everything. That's why I say this is one of the greatest forms of activism available is interpersonal relational work, because what happens inside of interpersonal relational work happens on the larger group scale. And starting here, in every conversation you have with every woman and every human, you have an opportunity to change the pattern. And when you change the pattern on a microcosmic level, it affects everything.
Mhm. So with that, I actually want to back up. I'm curious, can you share a little bit more? I'll totally nerd out about this in spiritual spaces and in growth and personal development. How did the wound really show up for you, like on the real, like everyday life level?
A good question, and the one that I speak to a lot. I think over time you start to see there's a range in which your wounds play out, and there's a range in which your shadows play out. But for me, one of my archetype core shadow expressions is this sort of dominatrix bitch, let's say. This is a word that's thrown around all the time, right? This bitch archetype. And because of what I came from intergenerationally, meaning the women in my family carried a very specific template that they unconsciously passed down, which then it's planted in my psyche and I eventually play that out. And then on top of that intergenerational piece, cultural, the way that I was raised, different life experiences, I being so sensitive and so actually soft and psychic and connected to the unseen, meaning emotional, right? Emotional is often an unseen space because you can have somebody saying, I feel like this, but like you said, to your point, they're actually emitting something different.
Mhm.
And you're reading. It's not necessarily what they're saying here, it's what they're emitting, what they're transmitting, and you're feeling that. And then it becomes this very confusing, convoluted, what am I crazy? Are they crazy? can I trust myself, what I'm picking up on? All of these things play out. And so I think it's a mixture of being such a psychic sensitive woman and coming from the women that I come from. I took on this persona of bitch in order to keep myself safe because, in fact, I'm actually really soft. And the way that my family has and women in my family have looked at softness is as weakness, which is very, very common across all cultures, some more than others. It was this, don't let anybody see how sensitive and soft you are because then you're going to be perceived as weak and then you're going to be dominated and you're going to be controlled and you're going to be abused and you're going to be taken for granted, right? And all the ways that our unconscious starts to spiral into the fear. So I built this very tangible bitch dominatrix, don't fuck with me, don't come near me. If you step past this line, be prepared for whatever.
Yeah.
And some of it was spoken and some of it wasn't spoken. Some of it was like learning that I have all of us have the power, but some have a kind of a bigger capacity for this, that my energetic expression can be so big that I actually don't need to say anything.
Mm.
And it's delivered in a way that's quite intense. And that can be a gift when you learn how to harness it. But before you learn how to harness it, you just throw weapons around. You're just throwing your energy around, and people are taking bullets, people are taking all kinds of things that you're not necessarily consciously choosing to project. And it made it very hard for me to feel safe to be soft.
Mm.
And it was like a negative feedback loop. I put on this persona to keep myself safe, but then women start telling me that I'm a bitch, which then feeds it and keeps it growing. And then it just keeps going and going and going. And so even though I've always really been surrounded by girls, I've always been surrounded by women, I've always had female network, always had really good girlfriends, you know, my best friend in childhood once said it so well. She said, Lex, you always bring a chainsaw to like a butter knife fight. And that was a really powerful moment for me. It took me years to integrate that and actually let it sink in. But that was the way my shadow was playing out. It was like, if you even come a little bit close with your tiny little butter knife, I'm going to make sure that you don't come any further because I'm going to intimidate you with something. And obviously, this mechanism is it doesn't allow for intimacy. It doesn't allow for humanity. It doesn't allow for deeper vulnerability. And so your relationships can only go as deep and as full and as wide and as meaningful as you're able to cultivate intimacy and vulnerability. And so I'd have these friends, but then at the same time, there'd be so much shadow stuff moving through the field that I couldn't cultivate the level of intimacy that actually the deepest, softest, most sensitive, most vulnerable, most psychic, sweet part really wanted. And so I had to really clear that out. And I had to really look at what part of my ego likes this and how do I dissolve that? And how can I start to center what I actually really want? And what would it look like for me to give up my safety? What would it look like for me to say, fuck it? I give up my safety and I'm trading safety for brave relating. I'm deciding that I'm going to move into a new relational context and I'm going to let this go. And it wasn't something for the woman that you see here today is not the woman that I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's a journey for everybody listening. You don't just drop it and it's done. It's like this, you're on the potter's wheel and you're really carving and sculpting and molding, and it takes time and patience and really listening and feeling and attuning, and then suddenly you start to carve out, shape out, mold out something that you feel really proud of and really aligned with. So there's a lot of ways that it's played out with me, but this is definitely one of the biggest, is that I've always secretly wanted someone to say, I really see how soft you are. I really see how like vulnerable you are. I really see how much life touches you. I really see how emotional you are. And I want to be there to hold you instead of people constantly thinking you're the tough one, you're the strong one, you don't have the same whatever. But I had to let people see that in order for them to go, this is a part of who she is. And that required a lot of humility to be able to go, I don't know how these people are going to, and along the way, my heart has been hurt. My ego has been hurt. And I always say with this body of work, it's a constant ego death. And true, genuine, coherent relationship is going to ask of you, ego death after ego death. Otherwise, you're just in relationship and codependency, feeding each other's egos and not actually centering evolution. And that's really the core of this work.
Can I share what I'm noticing as you've been sharing?
Please.
First of all, I noticed the way I experience you first is the both. I can both feel the softness, but it doesn't feel like collapse. So for me, that's a little bit easier to trust in because I can see that. So my version probably comes from having a pretty strong personality, especially as a little one, but also being very soft and sensitive. And when my strong personality met relational settings and it was too much for other people, I went the
Mm,
other way. So I was like, ooh, cover that up. Don't be strong. Don't be aggressive. Don't give other people the benefit of the doubt. Basically,
mm,
abandon my knowing in favor of what I think
mm,
they need or what
yeah.
they're telling me they think they need. And so part of
Mm,
my growth has really been like seeing the level of distortion that is and how, and like actually trusting that as another person, you can handle me in my fullness and that it's not actually a danger to you.
mm,
And so when I'm in spaces where that just, so the way I experience you is both having the soft and also like, you've got yourself.
mm,
Yeah, we need support sometimes, but also you know who you are. That feels even more safe for me to be like, oh, this is
mm,
me and it's not going to actually hurt you.
mm.
That's in my very quick version of how I've experienced that.
And you know what? It's a really good point because the collapse piece, which is something that we talk so much about in the immersions, is for me witnessing both kind of the heightened aggression or intensity and also witnessing a lot of collapse in my family, in the women,
Mm.
in the feminine, and often feeling like because there's so much collapse, I have to overcompensate now. And I have to get all my swords and all my weapons and all my armor, and I got to be ready because she's going to collapse and she's going to collapse and she's going to collapse.
Mhm.
And no one's got me and no
Mhm.
one's got anyone else, right? There's an interesting thing here that also plays out as well that I see play out in relationships with women, even now when I can feel where someone doesn't have that ability to hold themselves and that they can move into collapse really quickly, especially relationally speaking. And that makes me feel really unsafe. Now, it's something I've been working with for so long that I have a lot of heightened awareness around how to navigate through it, but it still will bring up things in me. And part of what my shadow likes to chew on to feed herself, right? Ego, right? Is how weak it is and how disgusting it is. And before I realized that this was playing out in my psyche on a conscious level, it was just happening. I was just judging and projecting, you're so disgusting, this is so weak, this is you're so pathetic, I don't have time for you, right? Instead of having empathy, instead of having compassion, instead of asking myself, what has this woman gone through that has gotten her to this collapse? My shadow self would immediately go into just disgust.
Mhm.
And part of what we do in this work is in order to transmute the shadow into its genius, we have to let her speak. We have to give her a conscious mic because everything's happening unconsciously, like robots. We're just going through and life is touching us. And depending on the way that life touches us or we touch each other, the buttons get pushed and the response or the reaction comes. But when we actually have someone touch the button and we don't have that immediate impulse, we pull back and pause and go, what just got pushed here?
Mhm.
What am I reacting to here? Whereas before, I didn't have that. I didn't have agency like that. I would just boom, which is what most of humanity does. And it's very empowering as a woman to be able to stop and pause. And now, when it happens with women, and I can sense this collapse, I can also sense where my shadow starts to come in with judgment, where
Mhm.
she starts to come in with projection, where she's in disgust, where she's unconsciously shaming that woman, which from my conscious state is just not okay with my values. It's not in alignment. It's not coherent for me. I'm devoted to women. I cannot sit in unconscious projection of shaming if I actually give a shit about women. And that is also why I do this work because there's so many women inside of this work who are still in that unconscious state and projecting things into the field towards other women while hosting them, while facilitating them. And so part of why I do this work, why life, why God, my own soul has asked me to do this work is if you want to do this work, you got to keep the mirror clean.
Yeah.
That's your responsibility here. It's not just throwing rose petals at people and telling them you're enlightened now or you're healthy now or whatever. It's how are you unconsciously projecting on them? And when I started to notice the ways that I was unconsciously shaming other women, I went, wait a minute, this is not okay for me, not coherent, not cohesive, not aligned. And then pulling back my power and going, how can I honor my shadow? Honor that there's things coming up for me based on my own childhood experiences, right? That her collapse is making me feel unsafe. And so, in order to make myself feel safer, I have to put a label on her as being bad. And that somehow creates safety for me. And this is how we unconsciously do it. If this is bad, I'm good. And then I'm safe because I'm good. And in Sister Shadow, a big part of this modality is what would happen if we went beyond right or wrong and good and bad when there's no fault and blame. It's
Mhm.
a it's I don't have the perfect answer, but the inquiry, the curiosity of opening women's minds to what would happen in relational orbit if we removed blame, which inherently is connected to shame. And shame, in and of itself, is what perpetuates the atrocities that we're seeing on this planet. And it has this very big runoff effect that we can't even begin to understand. As we transmute it interpersonally, the impacts that it has are huge. And so I love that you pulled this out, this piece about collapse, because it's very common in the field, in the feminine psyche. And it's something we work with a lot in the modality.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you for doing this work.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that brings up, I want to talk to you about what you call brave relating. And on that note, for working through these shadows, I think it's when it comes to spiritual work, a lot of us try to, I think, reach some kind of mastery without actually interacting with each other. And I run into this so often with different tools and modalities where, I'll teach a journey technique or when I work with plant medicine, one of the first questions afterwards is, oh, how do I get the tool so I can just do this thing that just gave me
Mm,
an amazing breakthrough? How can I do it on my own? And not to take away somebody's autonomy, but I feel like, oh, that you're missing the point isn't
mm,
actually the tool. The point is the people as medicine. Can you
mm.
share a little bit more about brave relating? What is that?
Yeah. Brave relating, it's this concept of safety, right? We're so obsessed with safety that we're removing courage.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is life is going to always require a life fully lived. Let me change that for a moment because there's a lot of people not living, right? They're just existing and they're very unconscious and they're very numb. That's
mhm,
most of humanity that are vibrating at that kind of frequency. When you really choose to live and be alive in your living, you are inherently going to experience so many expressions of unsafety
mhm,
and insecurity. And I can't remove that. I can work really hard to be a space for everyone in my life, in everywhere that I go, that invites people to come into their heart, but I can't guarantee you that you're going to feel safe because this is such a personal experience as well.
mhm,
Because what might feel really safe for me doesn't feel safe for you. And so we have to renegotiate our relationship with safety. And so instead of calling it safe relating or nonviolent communication or nonviolent relating or whatever, which is beautiful, this part of my work is really about how can we cultivate the courage that we need so that no matter where we are, we're able to regulate or mobilize, right? And
mhm,
that's noticing where our nervous system goes. Are we more in fight and flight? Are we more in fawn? Are we more in freeze, collapse? Where do we go when we feel unsafe? And brave relating is about understanding that no matter if you want to give yourself to evolution, if you are really here on an evolutionary journey and you are centering evolution at the core of your life, you're going to need to be brave a lot because you're going to have a lot of ego deaths. You're also going to, a big part of brave relating is also renegotiating our relationship with death because death in our culture is this negative thing that equals failure. And we want to remove it from everything. If a relationship dies, if a career dies, if a dream dies, it's failure. And we need to reconceptualize this because death is the other side of life. Death is life's sister, right? And so it's really understanding that brave relating is also going to call us into relationship with death. So what that looks like on a very practical level is you and I are having some kind of a relationship, right? Maybe it's professional, maybe it's personal, maybe we're friends, maybe we're neighbors, whatever. And something happens, a tension point happens, a fracture happens. We've been going along, we've been having a good time, there hasn't been any buttons pushed, we've all been all good. And then the inevitable happens.
Sure.
As the relationship evolves, there's going to be tension. It's just part of evolution. And there's going to be friction. That's also part of evolution. You can either go, whoa, this equals bad. I can't go into this. So I'm going to have to like cover myself up with all my artificial layers and re-enter the relationship because I'm avoiding the pain. I'm avoiding rejection. I'm avoiding unsafety. I'm avoiding being wrong. So many things that we're in avoidance of. So we lean away from it, or we can lean in and go, what might happen in this relationship? What might happen to the quality of my relationship with this person and to myself if I actually took the opportunity to center evolution so that can build intimacy with this person? And what if on the other side of this tension was an even deeper level of connection? You don't know for sure because you don't have control over people, right? So like people want me to remove all of these things from the brave relating context. And I can't tell you how your sister's going to take it, your mom's going to take it, your client's going to take it. I have no idea because they have their own constellation of reality, of traumas, of experiences, of tools or not. And they're going to do the best they can with what they have. And that might not be able to meet you in this moment, which means you might be forced to have an invisible conversation with Lady Death and go, is this a relationship I want to continue to feed if it's not coherent?
Mm-hmm.
Or if the values aren't aligned, or if they're unable to meet me at this level of authenticity, of integrity, of transparency, of vulnerability. If these things really matter to me, then I might need to let go of this relationship, not from judgment, not from blame, not from wronging, but from just the fact of the matter is we are not in coherency. This is not coherent. And we're both going to be held back if we remain in the loop of artificiality. And so I look at it as a favor. If we're in a relationship and you meet me in a way that you're not able to have the same level of awareness or cultivate a new level of awareness through the cultivation of new tools or whatever, then I look at it as I'm doing you a favor by stepping away.
Mm-hmm.
Because my stepping away means I'm no longer enabling that pattern within this relationship, which means I'm one less person in your life that you're going to relate to in this artificial way.
Yeah.
Which means that's going to catalyze something for you, whether it's this time or the second time or the fifth time or the 100th time that you have to live through that, right? I'm going to catalyze something for you. And I don't look at that as negative anymore. I look at that as this is the greatest way that I can love you. This is the greatest way I can believe in you. This is the greatest way that I can catalyze your highest evolution is no longer relating in a way that's artificial. I'm doing it because I love you, not because I don't love you, right? And when we shift that perspective and we go, oh, but they're going to be hurt, or I'm going to be a disappointment, or they're going to be angry, or it means I'm a failure because the relationship had to dissolve. All of that is old story based in colonial culture that has put death outside of everything. But death sits central to absolutely everything, especially relationally speaking. And so the context of brave relating is very vast, but above all, it's the willingness to get curious and to ask yourself, what if this conflict, what if this tension, what if this fracture was going to bring me into a level of relationship with this person and with myself that's actually going to deepen and enrich every aspect of my life? And when you've lived that enough times in your body and you've actually seen it happen and experienced it, you start to have more and more courage. And each time the opportunity presents itself, you have less resistance because you know what's on the other side. But what you don't know is how they're going to react. And you also get better at that. You also get better at holding, this isn't my responsibility to manage how you handle this, what you do and don't do. I'm looking at you as a liberated, free being who gets to do whatever she wants to do. And I'm going to see you in your highest no matter what you choose. This is brave relating. This is empowered, coherent relating from my perspective. And it's something that, again, is going to require a lot of ego deaths because there's going to be moments when your ego is so triggered and activated, and you're going to want to say, I'm right and she's wrong and she's bad and I'm good. And all of that shit just gets in the way of the evolution. Just let it go. Feel it, move it through, alchemize it, dance with it, scream it out, whatever you got to do. And then you got to let it go because you're not going to evolve and they're not going to evolve. And eventually you get so exhausted with this pattern because it just, if it's not her, it's going to show up in the next woman and the next woman and the next woman and the next partner and the next lover. And then you're going to keep looping through it until you exhaust yourself and you finally go, fuck it. I'm ready. Be brave.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that's not only is it I love you so much that I'm not going to feed this distortion, but I also love myself so much that I'm not going to change who I am to accommodate.
And there's a real big distinction. I feel like this is another piece that's really a nuance in the relational context. And that's we swing from polarity. We go from enmeshment to individuation and kind of this like hyper sovereignty. I remember there was a time in this industry where it was just like sovereignty. Everything was fucking sovereignty.
Yeah.
And it's because so much enmeshment has been dying, right? So many of us are breaking free from the enmeshed patterns, but it's neither polarity. It's not enmeshed to the point that I don't know what's you and what's me. And it's not, I'm so independent and individuated that I don't need to take accountability for the way that I'm impacting you. It's interdependence. And when you get to a place of that nuance of, yeah, I don't need to change myself, but if I love somebody and I want to cultivate a deeper whatever with this person, what tools, what perspectives, what templates can I work in order to, without, it's very different than self-sacrificing or self-abandoning. It's what does this relationship need mutually, reciprocally to thrive? And are we both aligned with what that is? Yeah. Is that swing I see all the time in the psyche of women.
Yeah. I'll share that where I've been exploring this in my work is in particular with the spirit realm. Same idea is there's the distorted version of that, which is, okay, Jesus, take the wheel, spirit, whatever. This was supposed to happen. I guess this is what spirit wanted for me. Like that kind of like removing any responsibility from or any personal desire from your experience. And then the other extreme, which is I'll do what I want. I'm the one in control here. I'm the one in charge.
Yes.
And for me, the way I've been like seeing it is really moving more into partnership. So it's neither spirit gets to choose as like this higher being, nor is it that I get to choose. It's actually like when I'm showing up, that's that sovereignty journey. Like I'm separating myself enough that I can actually feel what I'm feeling and who I am and what I actually believe, so that when I come back into the collective or into working with spirit, it's in partnership rather than just enmeshment or just sovereignty. And I feel like that's where we're going as a collective. That's where I see us going as a collective.
Totally.
Oh, this is what we're doing here.
Totally. It's the monk, right? It's you can sit inside of a temple in the Himalayas and meditate all day because you're not in the relational orbit anymore. You're not in the same kind of relational orbit. Of course, you're in relationship to nature, you're in relationship to spirit, you're in relationship to yourself, theoretically speaking.
Sure.
But you're not really in the human relational orbit. And I've felt very clear in my own path, that's not an option for me, at least not in this life. Maybe I've had other lives where I've gotten to sit that out, but this life is really about being a bridge. And that means the hardest work we're going to do is the relational work. Because whatever you cultivate on your own in your journey of sovereignty and breaking enmeshment and coming into your authenticity, whatever you do to cultivate that, the reflection on the other side of you and the other human beings around you is going to put that into question. It's going to agitate that. It's going to inflame that. It's going to activate that. And you have to be able to exist inside of the relational orbit and still be able to come back to yourself, right? Because I think the enmeshment template, everything that everybody says impacts us. Everything that everybody does impacts us. And we're just like, whoa, this, and you have no sense of center because you're really so enmeshed in everybody else's stories, projections, energies, whatever. And then the other end of that, this hyper individuation, which is, I don't fucking care what anyone thinks. I don't really care about this. I don't really care about, yes, you do. We all do because we're social, communal, village, interrelated beings, and we're here to serve that interrelated, interdependent reality that's mirrored back in everything that we see in this reality, in this nature. And it's the hardest work because it's going to challenge everything that you think you've cultivated, everything that you think you've built within yourself. If you go into the relational orbit and it starts to sit in question, then you see how much you've cultivated or not cultivated, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we're going to share this in the show notes, but you have a training on brave relating. But I'm curious, so aside from those of us that are devoted to personal evolution, who would this be for? How can it help people?
The brave relating, specifically this specific workshop, I think it's my favorite, at least one of my favorite workshops that I've ever hosted. There's a very specific map that I speak to in the way that we brave relate. So one of those steps within brave relating, I call romancing the edge. So instead of when you reach that edge in relationship or that tension point, that cliff where you don't know what's on the other side, instead of projecting its negativity, what if you romanced it? What if you really played energetically with it? And we talk a lot about conflict kink, like where can we actually, not in an unhealthy way, but in a really healthy way, go, this conflict, it can turn me on because I know the intimacy that's going to come from this conflict, or the possibility of the intimacy that can come from this conflict, or the growth or the development, right? And this workshop, even it's not just for women, it's not just for relationships with women, it's not just woman to woman relationships, it sits in the field with all relationships. If you can bring the mapping and the tracking and the tools from brave relating into every area of your life, you're going to start to see a radical change in your whole orbit, your whole relational orbit, from your partnership to your professional relationships to strangers to just the way people receive you, the way you receive people. So in terms of who it's for, it's really for everybody. And it's a really empowering, and I would say, even though it's a tender subject, it brings a lightness and a playfulness and kind of this opportunity to stop taking it all so fucking seriously and just really lean in with curiosity, lean in like you're making art and you're learning through the process of making that art instead of being afraid to put a paint down because you don't know where it's going. You just start the process. And it's motivating because what you can see, what you start to see shift in your relationships is it is the motivation to keep going, even when it's sticky. At least for me in my life, and I see it in all the women that come into the immersions and the workshops, is the motivation becomes, wow, I just saw this profound shift in the tectonic plates in the architecture of this relationship or that relationship. And I want more of this because now I'm starting to feel the visceral cellular enrichment that this is having on my life, on my nervous system, on my stress, everything, because we're co-regulating beings. And when we avoid each other, we're also avoiding the co-regulation and the connection that supports our health. Yeah, I highly recommend watching it. It's a great workshop.
Perfect. It's also reminding me, I noticed earlier this year, I had this series of events where I could see myself avoiding a conversation in several different situations. I was definitely avoiding conversation. And I was just worried about I just wasn't, at the time, I wasn't sure if it was criticism, if I was going to be ready for it or able to handle it.
Mm,
And so that was my holdup. And when I finally leaned in with all of those, it wasn't criticism waiting for me at all. It was just this like overwhelming love.
mm.
And I
Such
just had to
a good
see that
example.
multiple times in a row to realize that how much I was missing out on.
And it's a perfect example of what you said earlier about who you were in your childhood and what you had to put away because it was being critiqued, right? And then you start to see those patterns play out in adulthood, that you're avoiding the same thing that happened to you in childhood, even though that might completely be the opposite case. And people want to praise you, people want to honor you and celebrate you. And you're missing out on that by projecting the old story, which we all do. And that's the work that we have to commit ourselves to.
Yeah, beautiful. So, what has your personal attention right now? What's your dream that you're playing into right now?
Ooh, my personal dream and attention. I think, yeah, it's this intersection for me. You spoke about it before the call, this intersection of art and relationship and art and healing and ceremony. And so much of my work is about ceremony. And I just got back from a gorgeous in-person immersion that I hosted. And it was so transformational to be in the in-person field and to actually see the translation of what myself and my team walk with in terms of the field was so clean that no woman felt any like fragment of sister shadow, sister wound shit, because we all do our work to keep our mirror clean and we set the field up. And so I'm feeling really inspired to keep creating those spaces, to be more than the teaching itself, to being the living transmission, because I think there's a lot of women out there who just don't believe it's possible anymore. They don't have the faith that these kind of relationships exist. And so they just resign themselves to this way of relating that is unhealthy and incoherent. And so I really want to start to work with things like the intersection of art and ritual within community to really showcase this, and to let it be a living transmission and a living prayer that people can just plunge themselves into. It's not even about the teachings. I don't even really feel like I was teaching on that retreat. I feel like I was just being, and they could plunge themselves into the beingness that was there through the field that we were creating. And that within that, there's just so much that can recellularize beyond that teaching itself. And so that's where a lot of my energy is going. And yeah, I want to write a book. I'm really wanting to bring the sister shadow reality into books, and also really into poetry. And that's my bringing these teachings, which are a bit rough sometimes, a bit like hard to chew, into a more poetic landscape that's inspiring instead of putting the fear of God in you. It's like, how can we really see the poetry and the beauty of this kind of what looks like ugly shadow, junky, clunky stuff? And yeah, great question. I love that question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I love it. I love what you're up to. You've got me excited. You've got me leaning in, and I like bringing in that spirit of play and fun to the hard work that we're doing. And it sounds like you've cultivated a lot of that and a lot of beauty into your offerings, into your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Alexis, thank you so much for being here with us. Again, we'll share how people can get in touch with you and links to the free training on brave relating in the show notes. Yeah, such a pleasure to have you on here. Yeah, really grateful for our time together.
Thank you, SpiritBird. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye for now. Welcome to today's Q&A episode, where we explore questions about spiritual paths, intuitive gifts, growing a spiritual business, and shamanism. Do you have a question for us? Send us a DM at Holton Healing Arts. A potent question from a shaman school student is, what is the difference between the underworld and the lower world? If you're not familiar with lower world, it's a term used in shamanism for when we do journey work. So the underworld in general, I think of as being a mythological place that exists between our middle world, our Earth 3D realm, and even the spiritual realm of our Earth and the 3D reality. So it's the layer that exists between that and between the lower world. Oftentimes, people will discover this place when they're working with lost souls or psychopump work, when they're working with ghosts, basically. So it's this layer that basically exists between these two realms, between the here and now in 3D, and basically being clean and clear on the other side of that. It's often a place where you would do, lost souls will go, and literally you might come across this when you're doing journey work in between the portal that you use to enter the lower world and actually arriving in the lower world. You might actually come across it. Lots of times people see it as like this hazy place. You might notice a smell. It's very much an in-between realm. The lower world, on the other hand, is the place where basically your base, your root in your chakra system and from your physical body meets with the earth. It's where that and Gaia actually connect. When you go to the lower world, you are actually like beyond this 3D plane. You're more likely to be finding like ancestral work there, and you're going to be working with just compassionate spirits, and beings that are in that place have actually crossed all the way over. So those are the primary differences between the underworld and the lower world. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading with Spirit. If you did, please share the link for this episode with your biggest takeaway, tagging me at Holton Healing Arts. It would also support me if you subscribed and left a rating and review of the show so we can support more people living their highest purpose. Until next time, journey on.